not something that is going to be reversed. When you think about globalization, there are really a couple of key areas to focus on. One, obviously, is trade, our exports and our imports. A second is foreign direct investment, who's investing in the United States, who of us is investing elsewhere. And third, we would argue, kind of doesn't get discussed in this context very much, but really is tourism. Because that is where most people come into contact these days with other cultures. If you think back 30 years ago, it was very expensive to hop on a plane and go to Europe or South America, much less over to Shanghai, where you can get in anyway. Today, it's taken for granted. If you have the money, you can pretty much do it. And it's not all that much money in a historical perspective. So tourism is not only one of the key business sectors involved in globalization, it is also a key economic sector and one of the largest producers of jobs and wealth in the United States today. So if we look at these three key trends affecting globalization, let's take exports first. As you can see, the long-term trend in U.S. exports is decidedly upward. There was obviously a sharp fall-off last year during the Great Recession. That has since recovered considerably across, and we think, in our opinion, that that long-term upward trend is going to continue. The question is, for businesses, are you going to be on trend or off trend, basically? In terms of what's happening here in Vermont, very interesting. This year, in the first 4 months of 2010, your exports were up almost 40%, double the national average, putting you in 6th place among states nationally in terms of export growth this year. That's quite an impressive performance. Your exports worth $3 billion. About 1,000 companies are involved in exporting goods from Vermont locations. That's a lot of businesses here. And what I found really quite interesting was that 86% were small and medium enterprises. So it's not just the Microsofts or the Cokes, who are involved here. It's a lot of businesses of all different sizes. In fact, one interesting fact is that every time a Boeing airplane is sold abroad, products from 12,000 American companies are included in that sale. So even if you're not frontline in the export trade, you are involved or might be involved in it in many other ways. And another interesting and I found fascinating fact about Vermont's exports, while not surprisingly, Canada is your biggest trade partner, I found it surprising, frankly, that your next largest ones were all from Asia, Hong Kong, China, Malaysia, and Japan, and not in Europe, which would have been my kind of untutored guess at this. So actually, the sort of the global diversification of Vermont business, I think, is really quite impressive. And this has direct impact on employment. According to the International Trade Association, trade supported about 78,000 jobs in Vermont, about 1/5 of total jobs in the states, up from 1/10 in '92, so that's a doubling in less than a 20-year period, substantial growth. And about 1/4 of the manufacturing jobs in the state are also dependent on international trade and exports. So again, a very considerable contribution to the Vermont economy. Another way of looking at the contribution and sort of the integration of the global economy is foreign direct investment. And relatively few people know that 5 million American workers now earn a paycheck from the U.S. operations of a foreign-owned company. And that number is not much lower than the number of foreign nationals working for American multinationals overseas. So net, a lot of people are concerned about job outsourcing, and yes, that's happening in certain industries. But there's also a lot of job insourcing as foreign companies move operations into the United States as well. And just briefly, here in Vermont, about 10,000 workers are employed by foreign-controlled companies. About 3.5% of the state's private industry employment is in this group. Here's some of the investment coming from Europe, Switzerland, and the UK. So you add it together, about 90,000 jobs are really directly engaged in the global economy in the state of Vermont. It's a pretty impressive number. Now to turn to travel and tourism. Here I think is again a very important story, particularly for a state like Vermont with your beautiful destinations, whether it be the ski slopes, Joe's Pond. I mean, travel and tourism is a huge contributor to many states' economies, and it's one in which the United States has fallen behind considerably in the last decade or so. As you can see, while worldwide travel, international travel, that means traveling to another country, not your own, is up 30+% since 2000. Travel to the United States is down 9%. And that's true pretty much every country. Those green bars show the number of Australians traveling outside Australia, up almost 70% since 2000, but to the U.S., only up 26%. So they're going elsewhere, not really coming here. In the UK, growth of 37% to other destinations, a shrinkage of 15% to the United States, with real economic implications for us. Nationally, the cost of lost travel, well, we've lost about 68 million visitors since 2000, which cost us about $500 billion, $500 billion in spending, 32 billion in tax revenues, 440,000 lost jobs, and because tourism, inbound tourism, is counted as part of the trade surplus, more than $250 billion lost in plus to our trade account over the past decade. So those are some very, very serious numbers. And, you know, and part of the problem here is policy and what we have done since 9/11. Here are some headlines from English and Australian papers, for goodness sakes. You know, these are our friends, and these are people really culturally close to us. But the Sunday Times piece, we don't have time to read it out loud, but it says, travel to America, no thanks. It's already nightmare, but now they want to make entry to the USA tougher. So let's go somewhere else. And you know where they recommend going? A more hospitable place? North Korea. Times of London, ladies and gentlemen. So it's really something to read that article. There's just been a huge ding to our reputation as an attractive tourist destination. You know, here's a front page from the Financial Times of Germany. This was in about 2005, 2006. Basically, Statue of Liberty and the international sign for stop. Don't enter. You know, this is costing us a lot of money. It has a lot to do with our visa policies. We demand personal interviews for tourist visas. In Brazil, you have to take a vacation to get a visa to come to the United States for your vacation, because it's the distances between where people live and where our consuls are located are so large. You can't just hop in your car and drive there in a couple of hours. We also have problems in our airports and at our borders, and you might know it's less of a land border issue up here in the north, but it is certainly an airport issue in international ports of arrival with our custom and border protections. We're rated the worst international travel destination in the world by a 2-to-1 margin by people who travel internationally. And that's because of the hassle of getting here. That's really not a good picture. So these are areas that we think need to be addressed. Now, why does citizen diplomacy matter? Well, we have to step back a little bit and think about how people think of us as Americans, particularly if we're thinking about the tourist business, but for business in general. There are a lot of positives. When you ask people from other cultures, what do you think of when you think about America and Americans? Well, opportunity, freedom, diversity, very creative, innovative nation, very entrepreneurial would be another word that comes to mind. Very benevolent, we're generous, we're caring, philanthropic. Lots of positives, but also lots of negatives. A lot of people think we're arrogant, that we're ignorant about the world. One woman in Germany told us in a research program, how can you lead the world when you know nothing about it? We're seen to be insensitive and disrespectful of local cultures, and this respect issue is particularly pronounced in the Islamic world. For better or worse, whether it's real or not, it is definitely a huge perception. Exploitative, and this is often the role of business, perceived as exploiting local consumers and local economies and not really giving anything back. So in the words of the old Johnny Mercer song, what we really want to do is accentuate the positives and eliminate the negatives, right?